If we are honest, haven't we all, at some point, daydream about hanging up our work boots or high heels way earlier than the traditional retirement age? But what does retiring early really mean? At its core, it's not necessarily about escaping work altogether, but about having the choice to engage in work that you find meaningful and fulfilling without the financial pressure. The equation you need to solve first, if you opt to go down the path, is how much money do you need to achieve FIRE? If you already started the research, you probably have heard of the 4% rule. But in this video, I'll show you why using 4% rule could be terrible and even dangerous to early retirees, and what strategy should we adopt as FIRE investors.
Show me the money.
If you're familiar with the FIRE movement, Financial Independence Retire Early, which has gone from a niche movement to a more mainstream investment objective.
The 4% rule.
Called the 4% rule.
The 4% rule.
The 4% rule?
The 4% rule is one of the most talked about rules of thumb in the world.
The idea is that by limiting annual withdrawals to 4% of the portfolio's initial balance, adjusted for inflation each year, the portfolio should last at least 30 years. To achieve early retirement, FIRE investors normally cut costs aggressively and save a large percentage of their income to build their nest egg for early retirement. When this portfolio is large enough to sustain their spending with inflation-adjusted withdrawals equal to 4%, they can retire. So people generally use their retirement yearly expense divided by 4% or times 25, same thing, to work out the size of the portfolio they need to build. And this is where the 4% is coming from. This 4% rule was initially suggested by a financial advisor, William Benjamin, from Southern California, in an article determining withdrawal rates using historical data in October 1994. However, Benjamin's analysis, while groundbreaking, was based on a set of simplified assumptions. Consider the story of Mr. Money Mustache, a notable figure in the FIRE community who retired at 30 years old with $600,000 in investments and a mortgage-free house. Believing in the 4% rule, he estimated his $600,000 investment could perpetually support his family's annual expenses of $25,000. If we plug Mr. Money Mustache's number into various calculators that use the Monte Carlo simulation, for those of you who are not familiar with it, Monte Carlo simulation is a mathematical model used to predict the probability of a variety of outcomes when random variables are at play. Sounds complex, isn't it? Think of it as a sophisticated tool that dives into historical data, running thousands of scenarios with your financial figures to forecast potential future outcomes. After stimulating 10,000 iterations, you might see the highest potential balance soar to 5.6 million. Your portfolio could dip to 86,000 in the worst case scenario, but most likely you'll land around 691,000. This illustrates the power of Monte Carlo during the wealth accumulation phase, but where it really shines is in the decumulation phase, when you start withdrawing from your nest egg. Take Mr. Money Mustache case as an example, plugging his numbers into a stimulator like CFLCM with an expectation of living into his mid-80s and withdrawing at a certain rate reveals an 88% success rate. And this suggests a high likelihood that not only will his funds sustain him, but he could end up doubling his initial portfolio to 1.3 million. However, switch to a different stimulator like FireCalc, and the success rate dips to 74% with an average final balance reaching around 2 million. Interestingly, his withdrawal rate was slightly above the standard 4% at 4.16%, which still showcases a favorable outcome over a 50-year horizon. However, it's crucial to recognize that any success rate below 100% introduces a risk of depleting your funds prematurely. And mind you, for Mr. Money Mustache, his website, mrmoneymustache.com, which was launched 6 years after he retired, generated $400,000 annually as of 2017, which I'm sure was unexpected to him as well. Back to the 4% rule, which we're revisiting its assumptions, let's lay out what are the hidden risks behind this rule. Number one is investment horizon. Originally, the 4% rule was designed around a 30-year retirement period, aligning with the traditional retirement ages and life expectancies. But if you plan to retire at age 30, for example, or if we take the average life expectancy of each country, you would need to account for 49 years and 54 years in total. You may argue at this point, wait a second, Irene, Can we divide the total retirement years into two phases? Early retirement from 30 years old to 60, which 4% would technically work. Standard retirement from 60 years old, you can access to the retirement fund, so another 20 to 25 years. But are you 100% sure your retirement fund has enough money to cover the second half phase of your retirement? The assumption is that you will stop contributing to your retirement fund once you retire early. So if we oversimplify the 4% rule, which covers for 30 years, we almost need to double the portfolio size. It's a lot more complicated than this when we stretch the investment horizon more than 50 years, but I want to leave it to another video to crunch the numbers. So for most of the FI investors, we are really looking at 40 to 50 years retirement timeframe to rely on the Nest Egg to support our lifestyle fully. And Vanguard uses Vanguard Capital Markets Model VCMM to test the 4% rule's probability of success. The outcome suggests that with the 4% withdrawal rate going from a 30 years to a 40 years and to a 50-year retirement horizon decreased from 81.9% to 53.7% to 36%. Number 2, investment fees and taxes are neglected. Benja's model, while insightful, simplifies investment returns by not accounting for fees and taxes, two factors that can significantly impact net returns.
Nothing is free in this world, you know. This lollipop cost me 50 cents.
How can the entire financial industry survive if they charge no fees? With 50 years retirement time span, 50% to US stocks and US bonds allocation, the success rate with no fees for a 4% withdrawal rate would be 36%, and 0.2% management fee would bring that success rate to 28.8%, and 0.6% management fee would bring the success rate to 16.5%, and 1% management fee would drop to only 8.6%. Benja's paper also neglected the effect of taxes. He stated in the paper that as if all the retirement money was stored in a tax deferral account, analysis for a taxable account would be considerably more complex. Number 3, asset allocation. The original analysis is focused on a 50-50 allocation between US stocks and the intermediate term treasury notes, introduces a home bias, potentially limiting its applicability to investors outside the US or those seeking diversified international portfolios. So technically, if we follow the 4% rule 100%, it's not even applicable to Australian FI investors because it's US market. And based on a paper by Gary Benson published in 1986, 90% of your portfolio returns are determined by how you allocate your assets. According to Vanguard VCMM, if we allocate 30% to US stocks, 20% to international stocks, 35% to US bonds, and 15% to international bonds, the success rate probability of 4% rule would increase from 36% to 56.3%. Another drawback is the reliance on historical returns. Benja's assurance of a 4% withdrawal rate is safe based on historical market performance from 1926 to 1992 might not hold in today's evolving financial landscape. If we look at the S&P 500 index, it is roughly 4.8% annual return, with inflation averaging at 3% from 1926 to 1992. If we stretch out from 1926 till now, the average annual return of US stock is 9.2% with annual inflation rate of 4.48%. As we always say, past performance is no guarantee of future results. Relying too much on historical returns to predict future will make early retirees either overly optimistic or pessimistic about their probability of success. Another drawback is the lack of flexibility. Regardless of market performance, the 4% rule allows investors with an initial 1 million portfolio, for example, to withdraw 40,000 annually, then adjust it for inflation. So in good market scenarios, you withdraw less than you should. When the market doesn't perform well, you withdraw more than you should, which potentially increases the chance of depletion. Now it's clear that a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't align with the varied and individualized path to financial independence and early retirement. So what strategy should FI investors adopt instead? Extend the planning horizon, giving the potential for a retirement span of 40 to 50 years or more. Recalibrating your financial planning to accommodate a longer time frame is essential. This involves preparing for a phase that extends beyond traditional 30 years of retirement. And be mindful of fees. Investment fees can significantly erode your nest egg over time. Prioritize low-cost investment and be vigilant about any hidden charges. Every dollar saved in fees is a dollar that remains invested for your future. Embrace diversification. Diversify your investment portfolio beyond your home country's markets, including international and emerging markets, can reduce risk and potentially enhance returns. And lastly, you should adopt a dynamic spending rules. Rather than religiously following a rigid 4% withdrawal rate, adjust your spending based on current market conditions, portfolio performance, and personal circumstances. And this dynamic strategy can help mitigate the risk of depleting your funds too early. Do you use a 4% rule to work out your FIRE number, or have you devised a unique strategy that suits your path to FIRE? I'm keen to hear about your experience and insights. My name's Irene. I'll see you next week.